Welcome back. All right, so I figured why not talk about expansion today? It is August the 3rd. Why not? So let me take a look at the board. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Still got 14 more videos to pre-record before I go on vacation, but this one's going up today because, hey, why not? So I wanted to look at the pros and the cons of expansion, and I'm wearing one of the cons of expansion. They expanded by 6 teams in 1967, and the Seals, the experiment in Oakland was a disaster. They renamed the team the first year, and then they renamed it again. They tried their best. They even changed the look to try to more incorporate themselves with the Oakland Athletics. It just didn't work. It just didn't work. And then they moved them to Cleveland. It didn't work there either. Kansas City came into the NHL. That didn't work. They moved them to Denver, where it didn't work. Then it went to New Jersey for a long time. It didn't work. So the NHL does have a checkered past when it comes to new markets and all of that. But the crazy amount of expansion we've seen at a few different periods in their history, late 60s, obviously, mid 70s, and then the early 90s, right? So, and I guess we could include WHA expansion in 79 and say mid to late 70s. And then you've got, of course, in the 90s, we went from 21 teams to 30. Now we're at 32. And the NHL is much more methodical than they used to be. But there's still pros and cons. So we'll go through this 1 through 10, and I'll do a pro and a con at the same time, because some of these are very related to one another. More NHLPA members is a pro. You can see this as a negative as a fan if you want. But for the NHLPA, they're going to want more union members. They're going to want to see more guys getting into the union and having a chance to play in the National Hockey League. That's to their benefit, gives them a little more power as well, which is where the con comes in about the dilution of talent. So, where I think this was an argument you can make in the late 60s and mid 70s. Again, where I'm at in the videos now, I'm at 75, 76. I'll be doing the 76, 77 one later today. That's how far ahead I am of where the historical videos are posting. Again, because I'm going on vacation, I want to make sure I'm well ahead so that they're all pre-recorded before I leave. So I don't have to worry about it while I'm on vacation. But you could see the dilution of talent in the numbers in the mid 70s. And keeping in mind that the NHL goes from 6 to 18 teams, and then there's a rival league that's employing a whole bunch of players, and it adds up to about 30 teams. So it's right about where we were before the Vegas expansion in the 70s, before you've got this huge influx of European players. Although the WHA period, it did allow for the influx of European players because teams needed to find more talent, and suddenly you had to go over to Europe to find it. So there is a dilution of talent argument to be made if the league expands beyond 32 teams. I don't think it's as dramatic as some people might think. I think if you add 2 teams, you're adding, 46 players to the league? I think you can find 46 guys that can play in the National Hockey League that are not in the league currently, keeping in mind there's some in-betweeners that get like half a season and don't quite get a full season in the NHL. Those guys might get a chance from that expansion team. We've seen with both Vegas and Seattle it can work, but I do understand the dilution of talent argument. Now, onto the pros. New fans and new markets. So you get a new market, you have new fans. This means grassroots. You're going to have kids wanting to play hockey because they're going to see players out there. It is an argument made in favor of Arizona. So if you look at Arizona just strictly on the face of it, you could say, well, that team had a hard time making money, and the attendance wasn't great. And we could discuss the fact that the team on the ice was terrible through most of their time there. But it does create new fans. It does mean kids get to watch them play. And so you're building that local interest in hockey. And the idea is simple. You get the kids to come into the rink and watch. They grow up playing the game. You have that infrastructure for youth hockey. And suddenly, your attendance, your local interest should go up. That's ideally what you'd want to see happen. And again, bit of a checkered history in Arizona, but those new fans and new markets are there. So if you go to Houston, if you go back to Atlanta, you're going to win over some new fans. There are still fans in Atlanta, of course, from the Thrashers. And so you do get new fans. On the con side of things, while you're getting new markets and new fans, you're getting long playoff droughts. So one thing I've seen online is the argument of, hey, I've waited X amount of years for my team to win the cup, and now there's going to be more teams that could potentially get in the way of my team winning the cup. My answer to that is, as frustrating as that can be, and I'm a Canuck fan. No Stanley Cup wins. They came into the league in 1970. The reality is the best team's still going to win the Stanley Cup. And whether it's 30 teams or 40 teams, the best team is still going to win the Stanley Cup. So you still have to be better than the others. But it is going to lead to long playoff droughts, which could depress the attendance in some of these markets, like what we see in Buffalo. Buffalo fans haven't seen games of consequence for a long time, and it makes it a harder sell locally. Say, hey, come out and watch, when the fans are thinking, why? I know you guys aren't going to make the playoffs. You never make the playoffs. I'm going to do something else with my money. So that is definitely an issue that I think is worthy of discussion. 3 on the pros, new rivalries. One discussion that was had at the last meetup that we had, I don't know if it was heard in the background of the live stream that we did of that. And we have hockey discussions. If you guys are listening close, you can hear the hockey discussions going on. But the question of, so Seattle, who are they going to have a rivalry with? My answer to that was Calgary. I'm going to be full on honest because Calgary just seems like they're the team that ends up irritating everybody. I don't know what it is, but I know as a Canuck fan, very often Calgary's one that just irritates people. But you get new rivalries. So now we're going to have a team in Utah. It means that you are going to have a chance for Utah to have a rivalry with Colorado that maybe you didn't have between the Avs and the Coyotes. Now, Utah's going to have to be better than the Coyotes were on the ice for that rivalry to matter, because rivalry technically isn't much of a rivalry if one team's just steamrolling the other all the time. But there is a chance for new rivalries, which is fun to follow. But 3 on the con side of things is, it is harder to follow as a fan, and I think it'll be harder for the media to follow too. You're adding 2 more teams. Let's just say it goes to 34 and then 36. You're going to have nights where there's 18 games going on at the same time. You can't follow 18 games. I'm not going to pretend I can follow it. I have a hard enough time with the 16. I think it's absolutely crazy, but the NHL thinks having, really, really busy nights is great, but it's hard to follow. When I was down in Anaheim in February, I was talking about the 16-game night, and I said it's great, but there's all kinds of really good moments that happen in these games that can then just get lost because you're overcome with this sea of highlights, and it all kind of ends up turning into white noise. And so for a league that really needs to push like really big plays and really big stars, if you have 17, 18 game nights and routinely have 16 game nights, it's just really hard to follow, and some great stories are going to end up falling through the cracks. So that's if they had a more balanced schedule, I don't think that would happen where you have, like, let's say 8 or 9 games every night. But the NHL's not going to go in that direction. That's not happening. Which brings us to a pro. For the NHL's perspective, those crazy busy nights are a pro. They love having those nights where there's 16 games and the idea of having more games than that. They'd love that. They also had the idea of wanting to have the longest continuous run of sport that any league had ever had. And the idea was to have games start in Europe when you're doing the overseas games, and then have matinee games in North America, and then just run right through. So you could have like 16 hours of straight hockey. They like that, and they feel like they can market that. We can have the discussion of whether they can or can't. But to them, the idea of adding more teams and having these crazy, really, really busy nights, it's great. That's what they want. Again, part of the reason that I'm ready to change the way that I do reviews on those busy nights is because I know they're going to get busier. I know the schedule gets more and more lopsided every year. At least it feels like it does. And so I'm getting out ahead of it and saying, you know what, I've got to give myself a little bit of a mental break on those really busy nights because they're just going to get busier. One thing, though, on the con side of things, so we're into 4 for the cons now, there's fewer options for struggling franchises. So let's just say there's a huge issue, and all of a sudden, the Calgary Flames need to move. Okay, the building, all right, they're putting up the new arena, and then something falls through. This is something that's not going to happen, right? But just using this as a devil's advocate. So the Flames, they're in trouble. Well, if you've expanded to 36 teams, where do you put them? So you've likely exhausted the amount of markets that are available. Whenever we have a live stream, we talk about expansion, people are mentioning all these cities. There's a lot of different potential cities. You're really making it so that the next option might be dissolving the team, and doing a dispersal draft, which is where the NHLPA gets involved and says, I don't think so. You're not firing 23 players. But the league puts themselves in a tough position. So, like, for instance, back in 2011, Atlanta loses their building. They move to Winnipeg right away. Winnipeg's ready. They've got their building. They're all set. Well, what then? Right? So Atlanta loses their building. You got 36 teams. Where do they go? And before you say Quebec City, if I think if they go to 36 teams, I think Quebec City's in there. I do. I think they go to Quebec City. So, yeah, I think that's one argument I wanted to put in there. You guys can let me know your thoughts on that one. 5 in the pros is added revenue. This is the obvious thing, is money, right? Money. I didn't put the expansion fee up there because it's an owner's thing, right? The owners get the expansion fee, but you have added revenues. You make more money. Businesses are supposed to be growing. You're either growing or you're dying if you're a business. And they run pro sports leagues like a business. Not as much like, and I understand all sports are businesses, but I think sometimes on the business side, they're just more concerned with the money than about the other side of it. And so, yeah, added revenues there. But 5 on the con side of things, and this is on the ice thing, it can lead to trap hockey. So when we got all that expansion in the early, mid 90s, late 90s, suddenly you've got teams that, because of the dilution of talent, now for your team to stay in the hunt for a playoff spot and to win night by night, well, you don't have the offensive talent of the high-flying teams in the league, but you can shut the high-flying teams down. So you end up with more games that are 2-1, 1-0, and not a lot going on the ice because it's just all defense and shutdown, which is how those teams have to play to stay in the game. But it can lead to some pretty long nights of watching hockey in terms of not the good way either, not like your triple overtime long nights. Just it can be really hard to watch. So when you get those extra teams, you can end up with some trap hockey, which and there's trap games where you're playing against a really low team like the Seals. But what I'm talking about a trap here is playing the neutral zone trap, and there's a modified modern version of that that's being played now. I think it would only spread around the rest of the league if we did see expansion to 36 over the next few years. And I've said I don't think this is going to happen soon. I think it's eventually going to get there. More stars to promote is 6th on the pros. I felt like on the negative side, but they don't promote their stars that well now. But that's not really a con to expansion. That's just a con to the way they do their PR. I don't think the NHL really promotes its game and its stars as well as they could. I think that they are tremendously talented, and because you can't just go out and play hockey on the street. I mean, I play street hockey, but it's not the same thing. You have to know how to skate. You have to be a damn good skater. And there's a certain level of skill with hockey and all those combinations of skills that I don't think they market it well enough. I think there's still too many people that'll make the joke of, oh, I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out. It's not that game anymore, but the NHL doesn't do a great job of promoting it. At least I think. I think you could promote the stars a lot more. The league makes more money. Those stars make more money. So that's where I feel that is right now. I think that the league could definitely do a better job of promoting those star players. On the con side, 32 is a perfect number for teams. You have 16 in the playoffs and 16 out. You have 8 team divisions for those. It's perfect. It's perfect. Playoff format's fine. If you're watching the history videos, you'll see. And once we get to what is a map, and you're going to get to those videos soon. I'm ahead of you because I've made the videos, but yeah, 32 is perfect. The NHL's inability to read a map in the 70s is one thing, but right now we've got 32 teams. The division alignments are pretty good. You can make an argument that 1 or 2 teams might be able to switch spots here and there, but in general, the divisions are really well done, and it's the perfect number. And they're going to go beyond it, it looks like. On the 7 in the pros, new branding and merch. It's always so much fun, at least for me, maybe it's just for me, to go through the process of naming a new team, watching the birth of a new team, and then watching how it develops. And so you get all those merchandising opportunities. So you have the Vegas Golden Knights, the Seattle Kraken, both of them selling pretty darn well and having, I think, good marketing In general, Vegas has embraced the gold, which is nice. Seattle's got the Kraken, which has that nice maritime theme since they're right on the ocean. I think that's fantastic. And it's part of the reason why Vancouver uses the Orca, because there are a lot of orcas around Vancouver. And I think the branding and the merchandise can be fun. One of the biggest storylines right now is Utah. What are they going to call the team? So if you add more expansion teams, there's definitely more to look at there, and I think that's fun. But on the other side, 7 on the cons is, and going back to the 32 is a perfect number of teams, more than half the league misses the playoffs. So in that event, what do you do? Right? And I'll come back to it, because the idea that more than half the league misses the playoffs is going to lead to some owners and some general managers saying we need to make a change. And it is a change that really could send a chill down the backs of some hockey fans out there if it comes down. And so we'll talk about it because it's number 10. But don't get ahead of us. Don't get ahead of me. I did think about, writing all this on the board during the video, and I thought, nah, I should have them all filled in first. So 8 on the positive side, increased ratings and interest. The TV contract in the U.S. is really important to the NHL right now. The TV contract in Canada is up soon. We'll see what Rogers is willing to pay, or what anybody's willing to pay for the NHL contract. But increased ratings and increased interest lead to more money, right? So if you have expansion into more American markets, theoretically you should get more money then from networks, whether it's ABC, NBC, ESPN, CBS, whoever. You should get more money from the networks, because you're in more markets. They know they're going to be able to draw more eyeballs to the product, and they should be willing to spend a little bit more money on said contract. On the negative side, and this is sort of a hockey purist side of things, and I think a lot of the time that fans my age and older will argue about the NHL and the expansion and everything that goes on there, it gets further away from its roots. We remember the game, so I would say the way that it should be played, or the way that it should be broadcast, or, the league was perfect when. And the reality is the league's always been changing since 67. Things were pretty standard during the original 6 era from 42 to 67, but the NHL understood there was interest in hockey elsewhere, and they expanded ridiculously fast, yes, as mentioned about the Oakland jersey, but it does get further from its roots. And so when you're putting a team in Vegas, when you're talking about a team in Houston, you're getting further away from hockey's roots, which is generally northeastern parts of the U.S. and Canada. And so it does get further away from its roots. I think that there are fans out there that the nostalgia for the way hockey used to be gets stronger with each expansion. And if you go to 36 teams, I think that'll just make it even stronger. So there is that con where the sport does kind of get further away from what it used to be. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, but I can understand the nostalgic side and why people wouldn't be all that happy about it. Number 9 on the positive side. Notice I put should. Should mean more trades. Should. Salary caps being as they are, it should mean more trades. I don't know if it does, but if you have 36 teams instead of 32, you have 32 teams instead of 21, you should see more player movement. Now, the flat cap over the last 4 years has kind of cut that off. And now this summer, a lot of GMs are right at the cap or right near the cap. I don't think we're going to see a lot of movement this coming season, but expansion should help with player movement. If for no other reason than if you add 2 teams to the league in, say, 2030, then you're making it so that players have more places to go. You're going to have, a bunch of guys getting picked in expansion drafts. Teams are going to have to replace those players. You're having a little bit more liberal movement, at least from the expansion draft perspective, and that should lead to more trades. On the con side, there's the scheduling headache that going beyond 32 teams adds. So NHL GMs want every single team to be in their barn at least once a year. So right now what that means is there's 32 teams, 31 home dates are just eaten up by needing every single team to come into your barn. So that leaves 10. 10 other home dates that you can use for rivalries. Well, now, if you go to 36, 35 of your home dates are eaten up by having every single team come in. It's 33 teams if you're at a 34-team league. And so having a schedule where you're having enough games against a team to create a real rivalry becomes more and more of a challenge, unless the NHL does something completely radical and does like a Major League Baseball kind of split where you have basically two different leagues that meet every now and then. But I don't think NHL owners want that. And so scheduling becomes a nightmare. And I think rivalries, we could see the end of rivalries if you go to 36 teams on some level. So, yes, there's a chance for new rivalries. There's also the chance rivalries are kind of gone because you now have too many teams to schedule to come into your building where, I mean, let's say you have a 9-team division. You got 35 different games spoken for. Well, you can't have all of them come into your building twice unless you go to 84 or more games. There's been the discussion of 84 games, but I don't know if it's going to happen necessarily. And if you go to 36 teams, does that work? So scheduling becomes more of a headache, and the rivalries could be lost. Absolutely could be. So number 10, eagle-eyed viewers will say that's the same thing for number 10. Yes, because it's a positive and it's a negative. Expanded playoffs. So with the idea that you're going to have more than 32 teams, well, now you're going to have a play-in. We're going to have, let's say, the top 12 teams. Your top 8 make the playoffs, or do they? Because teams 9, 10, 11, and 12 have a chance to play their way in and potentially knock out teams 5, 6, 7, or 8. And I'm just using that as an example, right? There's people who really wouldn't like it, me included. I don't like the idea of a team that finishes 5th in the conference. Let's say they have 105 points during the regular season, and them getting knocked out in a play-in by a team that had 78 points or 82 points. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right. The play-in can't be a 7-game series because you're not going to have a series to play in, which is going to leave a bunch of teams sitting around waiting for a week and a half to get things started, or 2 weeks. So the expanded playoffs would give an opportunity for teams to maybe play their way in, but you're making it so the regular season doesn't mean as much. And I would argue that in a league now where half the league misses the playoffs, the regular season means a lot more. The regular season means more now than it did in the 80s when I watched hockey, because 16 out of 21 teams made it. So if your team missed the playoffs, either they were in the stacked Patrick division or they just weren't very good. That was the argument. Either you're in the Pacific, either I kept wanting to say Pacific. You're either in the Patrick, which was usually the really good division where a good team would miss the playoffs, or you just weren't good enough. So teams with 59 or 60 points could sometimes make the playoffs, which if that happened now with some kind of expanded playoffs, I don't think fans would be happy about it. And rightfully so. We shouldn't have been happy about it in the 80s. But the expanded playoffs are a double-edged sword. You get the expanded playoffs, you have more revenue, more teams are going to be involved, more fans are going to be watching down the stretch to see who does or doesn't qualify for those play-in positions, but it does diminish the regular season in its importance. So expansion has this huge potential impact on the entire league beyond just having extra teams, because owners and GMs would want to see some kind of expansion to the playoff setup. I know Gary Bettman's been very anti expanding the playoffs, but at some point in time that I think likely would change. And if we go to 36 teams in the NHL, likely changes. But again, I thought it would be an interesting debate to have on a Saturday while it's hot out and all that. So why not? I'll throw a debate video up. You guys can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Pros and cons about expansion. You guys can let me know pros and cons you see to expansion as well in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.